Hey there folks, in this video of the Microsoft MD-100 course, we'll be covering Module 8, which is about managing apps in the Windows client. You'll be surprised to know how much can be said about just apps in Windows. A lot of folks are under the impression that apps are just apps and that they're all actually the same. This couldn't be more wrong. You actually get many kinds of apps. That brings us to our first main topic in this module, the types of Windows apps you actually get. Yes, folks, the types. There are many. Before we explain the types, I think let's first start things off by listing some of these for you. The first type of app you get, which is easily one of the oldest and most common, is desktop app installation. More on that in a bit. Then we also get Microsoft Store apps. Some of you might have seen the Microsoft Store icon in the Windows taskbar by now. Heck, some of you might even have opened it by now. You also get universal Windows apps. Then you get RemoteApp Apps. Yes, you heard correctly. It's not a typo either. You actually get apps called RemoteApp Apps. If you're curious, hang tight. We'll get to them later in this video. Lastly, folks, you also get apps called AppV apps. The V in the AppV stands for virtualization, in case some of you don't know. So there you have it, folks. That is some of the different types of apps you get in Windows. And we're going to explain each and every one of these in just a moment. But before we do, if you haven't done it already, please boink that like button. It helps the channel in more than one way. So you'll be doing me a favor. Also, like usual, a reminder, if you'd like to know when I release new lessons, for example, another lesson for this course, remember to, of course, subscribe. Okay, then, now that I have a little selfless promo out of the way, let's elaborate on the first type of app we have here on the list. Now, with desktop app installation, the chances are you have already done this at some point, at least partially anyway. This is basically when you go and install an app the old-fashioned way by just using a DVD or by just downloading the file off the internet and then just launching the installation wizard, of course. Pretty straightforward, right? This file you install can be either a .exe in extension or .msi in extension. If it's on the user's own personal computer or their work computer, the chances are it's most likely going to be an exe version of the setup file. The simple installation can easily be replaced by distributed app installation in bigger environments, and often this is the case in medium to large organizations. It allows the IT teams to deploy the app in question to a large group of users or devices in one go, instead of having to go to each and every computer one by one, which would take forever and a day if you think about it. There is many ways this can be done, but it's often done by using a tool like Microsoft's Endpoint Configuration Manager, for the folks that might not have heard of it or used it. Okay, let's look at that list of app types again. What else do we have here? Let's talk about Windows Store apps. I think by just looking at the name, you might already kind of have an idea where we can find these apps. Yeah, obviously these apps are found in the Windows Store, folks. For the folks that don't know what the Windows Store is, depending on the edition of Windows you're running, if you're running the higher end editions of Windows 8, 10 or 11, you'll sometimes see an extra icon on the taskbar way at the bottom. It looks basically like a little shopping bag with a Windows logo on it. The icon tends to change from time to time as Microsoft releases new updates, of course, but generally it always looked more or less the same. Normally it looks like a shopping bag of some kind, and it normally has some sort of Windows logo on it. Now, in the Windows Store itself, you'll find all kinds of things, mind you, not just apps. You can actually find things like movies, games, and much, much, much more in there. That's besides the point, though. We're getting kind of sidetracked here. So, where do we find these apps called Windows apps? In the Windows Store, of course. The apps can either be installed directly from the Windows Store, like you would expect, or you or the user in question can go and perform something called side loading if you want to go that route. Alrighty, looking at our list once again, next we have Universal Windows Apps. The universal Windows apps has many benefits, so many that they are actually way too many for me to mention here. So you can actually go look deeper into that after you've watched this video, if that's something you would like to know a little bit more about specifically. They essentially allow you to run an app on any device that is running Windows. As long as they are running Windows and sharing the same core APIs, you'll pretty much be able to run these apps. So in short, you can run these apps on multiple hardware platforms, which is very useful these days since we have so many platforms. If you have one of these universal apps that are running on Windows desktop or a Windows laptop, it will then also run on your Windows Xbox, for instance. Really neat, right? These universal apps are very secure in many ways, folks. They will, for example, declare which of your device resources will be used and accessed. You will then have to go and authorize it first before it can actually use or access any of these resources. You'll actually see something very similar happening on most smartphones these days. When you install an app or a game on the average smartphone these days, you'll often see a pop-up at some point during the installation or when you try and run the app or game for the first time. And this pop-up is basically going to ask you whether it can access certain resources and if you're going to allow it to access these resources. This could be something as simple and as easy as your phone's camera, for instance, your phone's memory card, that kinds of stuff. The secure benefits you get with these universal apps are much, much more. You also get benefits like adaptive controls and input. The user interface elements of these apps respond to the size and DPI of the screen the app is running on by adjusting their layout and scale. Pretty cool, right? Sounds like it's AI, artificial intelligence. It's not, but it's close. These apps work well with multiple types of inputs such as keyboard, mouse, touch, pen, and Xbox One controllers. I kid you not. If you need to further tailor your user interface to a specific screen size or device, new layout panels and tooling help you design a user interface that can adapt to different devices and form factors that your app may run on. So form factors will be something like a tablet, phone, desktop, laptop. These are examples of various form factors. Okay, and then back to the list of app types. Now we're going to cover the fourth one, which has somewhat of a confusing name for some people, and that is the one called Remote App Apps. Very confusing for some folks. By looking at this name, you might have guessed it has something to do with remote. You might not know exactly what, but if you guess it has something to do with remote technology, you'd be right. So one of the first and main things you need to know about these apps is that they run remotely and simply just display onto the client's device's screen. I mean, no surprise there, right? If you're familiar with how some forms of cloud works, this might kind of sort of sound like that to you at first, but it's not cloud though, because with cloud, the resources is usually on someone else's property. Someone's servers, like Microsoft, for example. With these remote app apps, though, the apps are usually installed and running on your server or your company's server. Not some other third party or some other entity like Microsoft or Amazon or what have you. It is on your server or your company's server, which means it is not cloud. No third party involved, folks. Therefore, it is not cloud. Make sure you know that. Now, why would someone want to run a remote app on a client device? Well, this could be for many reasons, but one of the most often cases is the client device does not meet the hardware requirements to run that specific application. So what we're saying here is if you or a user have a client device that needs to run a certain application, but now you realize this client's device doesn't meet the minimum hardware requirements, you can now go and run this application as a remote app and get around that problem. Pretty nifty, right? The app will then be installed on a server elsewhere and will also run on that server elsewhere. On the client side, the app will simply just display onto the client device and look like any other normal app to the user. Speaking of looking like any normal app, these remote app apps, wow, that's a mouthful, it's difficult to say. These remote app apps that are installed and running remotely, from the user's perspective or client device, they will look exactly like any other normal apps that are installed locally. The user will also launch them exactly like any other normal local app. The user will in fact never actually know when they run one of these apps which are remote app. For the most part, we don't want users to know since that just causes issues down the line. Usually, the less the users know about this, the better for us technicians and engineers. Alright folks, looking at the list of app types for the last time, the last one here on the list is App v apps. So, what's the deal with App v apps, you might ask? Well, like universal Windows apps which we discussed earlier, application virtualization is designed to achieve similar goals, such as simplified application installations and minimizing the impact to the operating system. However, the architecture of an AppV app is quite different. AppV is used to deliver Win32 apps virtually to clients, either automatically or on demand. Unlike universal Windows apps or desktops apps even, the application is never actually installed on the client operating system. The AppV client simulates an operating system environment and then specially prepared virtualized applications run within that simulated environment. Virtualized applications do not interact directly with the client operating system, but instead interact with the AppV client. The AppV client functions as a proxy through which the application uses operating system resources. Think of the proxy as a middleman. I think that's a pretty good example. From the user's perspective, on the client computer, the experience is no different than any other normal application. Sounds like that remote app we spoke of a couple of minutes ago, right? In the engine room, App V is very different compared to remote app, but from the user's perspective though, the experience will be exactly the same. Ultimately, that is our goal if you think about it. We as IT people are constantly trying our best to always give the users the same experience so it causes less confusion for them. But in reality, in the background, we IT people are constantly mixing things up and changing things. The users just never actually know what we're really doing. I know it's weird, but you can kind of think of IT people as superheroes. I'm saying superheroes because we do so much for the users in the background to help them and makes things easier for them, but yet most of them will never actually know what we did for them and how much effort and work we had to put in to do it for them. Superheroes are very much the same. They help people, but the people usually never know who the superhero was or is, since they normally tend to wear some sort of mask to hide their identity. So yeah, think of yourself as a superhero, guys. Lastly, folks, before we finish this topic, the AppV apps are never actually installed on the client operating system. I think I might have even mentioned that earlier. They just use the client resources. But just saying that, it might sound pointless, but believe me, this is a massive benefit in some cases. If you, for example, have applications that would normally conflict if they're installed on the same machine, now you can get around that problem. That's just one of the many scenarios where this AppV proves more than useful. Anyway, folks, let's talk about methods of deploying apps. How do we actually get various apps to the users or their devices? It's not always as simple as in the old days where you just walk up to someone's computer and install it manually yourself. Nope. Things have gotten much more complicated than that. For instance, if you just look at the amount of users most companies have these days, it's usually hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands. It's just not logical to go to each and every machine now. You'll never finish. We're also sitting with the situation of people no longer working from the office. A lot of folks these days are working remotely, usually from home in most cases. This is not just because of COVID-19, mind you. We're heading in that direction anyway. We were heading in that direction. COVID-19 simply put things on the fast track when it comes to remote connectivity, but in reality, everybody was going in that direction anyway. Now, from the technician or the engineer's perspective, that's not obviously us, it becomes a little bit of a problem when it comes to managing these users, managing their devices, and managing things, especially like apps, which is the topic today. How the heck do I give these users the applications they need if they're never actually in the office? That's where this topic comes in. Depending on what exactly your unique situation is, you will be able to use one or more of the methods I'm about to list for you. Okay, so what are these methods, you might ask? The first one is the most obvious, and that is manual installation. You or the user will have to physically go to the computer and install the app the old school way, like in the old days. I don't think I need to say much more than that about this, since it's pretty much a method everyone has done some point in their IT career. This could even be a simple case of you just installing a computer game at some point in your life. The only times we still install apps manually is if it's on our own computer or if it's in a Soho environment. So Soho is short for small office, home office. So that's basically a small office environment of normally less than 30 people, give or take. So in a small office environment or on your own personal computer, yeah, there you might install an app manually, but other than that, you're probably never going to do this. Now, the second method you can make use of that gets apps onto devices is to use group policies. It's not a new method, it's actually a very old method, but I'll have you know that group policies is a very powerful tool. For those that aren't aware already, there are over 3,000 things you can configure via group policies. Yeah, that's a lot, right? Using group policies to deploy apps to user devices used to be one of the most popular and widely used methods, but lately it's slowly but surely being phased out. Kind of sad, right? The reason is, of course, because there are now many other newer and better tools and methods out there to make use of. The third method to make use of is Microsoft Intune. This is one of my personal favorite tools to go and use. I suppose we all have our own favorites for doing whatever it is we hope to achieve. Now, this Intune tool is a cloud platform of Microsoft which was originally designed to manage phones and tablets. But most companies use this tool to also obviously go and manage desktops and laptops because it is possible. Using this tool, you can manage any device of any user regardless of where this device is, regardless of what form factor it is. So it could be a desktop, laptop, phone, tablet, you name it. You can manage any device regardless of its operating system. Yeah. The devices don't even have to be running Windows. They can be running Apple, Linux, Android, whatever. Pretty cool, right? There's a catch because now if I say it like this, it kind of sounds like it's a tool that's used for hacking, and no, it's not. So generally, these devices that you're about to manage from anywhere, anytime, anyway, have to be enrolled into a company Intune environment, which basically means that gives you permission to pull all of these shenanigans on those devices. Now that we have a sense of the reach of this fancy tool, the amount of things I can actually do with users' devices is actually kind of scary, if I'm being perfectly honest. It really makes you feel like nothing is private anymore these days. I suppose that's kind of true if you think about it. One of the many, many things you can do is you can manage apps on users' devices. Yes, that's the main topic here. You can remotely deploy apps. You can go and do compliancy scans on apps to check if they've got the apps installed that needs to be installed, or if they've got apps installed that's not supposed to be installed. Speaking of apps that's not supposed to be installed, you can also go and remove apps on users' devices. I must say, it really freaks the users out sometimes when you install or uninstall stuff suddenly on their machines. You might actually enjoy this tool one day. It's kind of fun to mess with users' heads, just randomly install applications, uninstall. It freaks them out, I'm telling you. Now, the fourth tool on the list is Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. This method uses the application deployment capabilities of the configuration manager to automate desktop app installation from a network share. For those that's not familiar with the configuration manager, it's part of a suite of tools which we usually call SCCM. Very fancy and very powerful collection of tools, but also very expensive and sometimes somewhat complicated if you have never actually used them yet. The main benefits of configuration manager versus deploying with, let's say, group policies are increased flexibility and detailed reporting. Oh, and you can also use configuration manager to distribute application updates, mind you. Next on our list of toys to play with, we have virtualized applications. This is the app V we spoke of earlier. When it comes to deploying apps, the app V is one method you can actually go and make use of. As I said earlier, app V can make applications available on desktop computers without installing the applications directly. Since I listed AppV as a method of deployment, it should come as no surprise to you that remote applications is also a method to deploy applications. When we say remote applications, it can actually mean more than one thing, but it's mostly going to come down to remote app apps, which we spoke of earlier. Wow, it really messes up my mouth when I say it like that. So if remote app features in Windows Server, you can avoid having applications installed on desktop computers. An icon will be on the user's desktop, the user just clicks on the icon, it opens an RDB session to a server that hosts the application. Easy peasy, simple. The application is remote controlled in a window. This simplifies things like updates because you must update only a single central copy of the application. This method works best with desktop apps that need to access data in a central location. Another method of deployment you can make use of, which is also the last one on my list, but also an extremely popular and widely used method, is of course to simply include the apps you want to deploy in something as simple as an image. You'll find that many organizations include common applications in the base Windows operating system image that they deploy to the desktop computers. So that normal image they go ahead and deploy to people's computers. Let's say there's a new employee that just got hired. This person's got a blank PC. They will go and provision that PC with an image. And that image happens to include all the applications the average Joe would have in common. That is the common applications we're speaking of. So with this method, you can avoid having a specific deployment process for the desktop app. However, this method also unfortunately results in increased image maintenance over time as your organization, of course, releases updates and newer versions of those desktop apps, which was now obviously included in that common image of yours. Common image. Let's just say image. Well, folks, there you have it. If you learned something in this module, like I said earlier, do me a favor and give the video a like. It truly, really does help the channel when you guys do that. And of course, also remember, if you'd like to follow my lessons, to subscribe. Lastly, folks, special shout out and thank you to the sponsors of this channel. Thank you, Patreon sponsors and also PayPal sponsors. Your support is really very much appreciated and it doesn't go unnoticed, guys. Alright folks, talk to you in Module 9.
If you love me, let me know. If you don't, then let me